Another weekly installment of Tutorial Tuesday coming right at you. Go ahead and ask your questions and I'll address them. I got a comment about the Instagram question box. It doesn't hold that many characters, so DM me a longer question if you have it. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for the compliment on my images. I really do appreciate that. There's a couple things that have kept me away from videography, and not that there's anything wrong with it. In fact, I truly enjoy videography, but the number one thing is editing, and number two is time. That's not to say that I haven't done videography. In fact, I have on some commercial jobs. They want me to supplement with video, and I'm fine doing that. I just don't edit it. But primarily for me, my income comes from still images, and I focus time and energy on that. Really good question here, and if you look at the images up on my walls right here, everything is natural light, and what I'm doing is I'm looking for bounce light off of different surfaces, say like horse trailers for example, but I don't use strobes in my ranch work. My ranch work is highly dependent on natural light, and once you learn to see it and you see how it bounces off different surfaces and provides a different color cast depending on what is being bounced off of, you can have fun with it and you can be creative, and that's a beautiful thing. By way of example, if you take someone out to a park and you do some portraits of them in some shade underneath a tree, what you're going to see is this color cast of green coming up through their face and their chin, and that's a light being reflected off of the grass. To compensate for something like that, like the reflection of the green coming up into somebody's face, just use a whiteboard right here. And you can see just right now how it's bouncing back into my face on this side. We can spend a considerable amount of time talking about this question right here, but here's a few tips to get you going. Number one, find out who their creative or marketing directors are. Send them portfolios, whether that be digital or in print, and be relentless about it. Couple other tips here. Make sure your images are up to par, make sure they're sharp, make sure you're following some type of compositional guideline. And number two, don't get emotionally attached to them, because when you go through a portfolio review with them, most likely they're going to tear your images apart. This is a pretty broad question, and it has multiple answers depending on what your subject matter is and where you're shooting, whether you're using natural or studio light, whether you're doing family or event or product photography, but I'll go over a couple tips. First, let's go over event photography. The picture I'm going to show you next is of Adrian Brannon, Buckaroo Girl official, and Lance Allred, former NBA player. And we're at an event, and I needed to take a picture of these two together. With that first example image of Adrian and Lance, what I need to do is balance out the ambient light and my flash. And to do that, I need to take a meter reading of what my ambient light is, and then also adjust my flash accordingly so I'm not overpowering them. On that last picture of Lance and Adrian, my exposure settings were ISO 1250 at f4 and 1/80th of a second, and my flash, which was a Canon 580 EX2, was only powered up at 1/8. In this next image of Brooke, what I've done is I've taken her and I've just sat her outside of a doorway so she's not in direct light, but I'm using 100% natural light. So for that picture of Brooke using natural light, my exposure settings were an aperture of f4, ISO 400 at 1/160th of a second. And that was it. But that's also seeing light and placing your subject out of that direct natural light. This is kind of a deep question right here. Do we develop those skills for us to go out and find new and exciting things, or do we develop skills to go out and make exciting photographs with boring everyday subjects? For me, the answer to this question really lies in what we define as success. So to be a successful photographer, what skills do we need to develop? I say develop yourself. Yes, we have to develop the technical side of things too. What I think this question comes down to is defining success, defining what boring is, and actually defining what exciting is too, because what's boring for me may be exciting for you and vice versa. Finally, on the technical side of things, when you have your skills down to where you feel like you go out and intuitively create images, you have to continually challenge yourself, because boredom is a killer and you have to go out and continually challenge. Pros and cons to this kind of lens. First disclaimer, I've never used it, so I'm going off of just what you've given me here. The pros, you have the 300 millimeter length and you have the macro. Those are the pros to it. The cons for me drastically outweigh the pros. The loss of light using a variable aperture lens like this, so at 70 millimeters, you're going to be around f4, and when you zoom out past 70, you're going to be at like f5, 6. On the practical side of things, if you're new to photography, you're probably going to outgrow this lens in 6 to 12 months. After that, you'll be looking to sell it on the used market, and then you'll be looking to pick up probably a used version of Pro Glass like the 70 to 200. What a great question this is. It's going to take a little bit of time to answer, but I'm actually going to read you from my 2018 book on what my goals are for this year, and I'll talk about what they were when we first started. When we started our business 10 plus years ago, we really had more, I would say, of a mission than it was a goal. And our mission is and was to build a sustainable business that we can pass on to our kids. In the very beginning, you do need to get your name out there. Maybe that's through magazine work, maybe that's through editorial. And let me just say this up front. If you're relying on magazine work to feed your family, you're going to be hungry. Giving back has always been fundamental to who I am as a human being, regardless of the position that I have. But as a photographer, I'll walk you through real quick what I did to give back. Going back 9 years, I started a nonprofit group here called Help Portrait Utah. What we did was provided free family portraits to anybody in need, and in that time we photographed over 12,000 people. Then in 2017, I successfully transitioned leadership of Help Portrait Utah over to another group called Your Light International, where they provide the same service to anybody in need, and I also served on their board. Now at this point, I wouldn't be able to talk about my goals without linking you to a podcast that I was on, so go ahead and swipe up. It's called The Definition of Success by Carson Jorgensen. It's a pretty emotional interview, but goes hand in hand with my goals. Thank you very much for asking. Yes, I absolutely do senior pictures, and I'll DM you the price list. For external flashes, up until a week ago, I was using Palsy Buff Alien B B800 and two B400s, and I also used a Canon 580 EX2 flash. I think what you're trying to ask here is, are all the photos taken by me? Yes, they are. This is a really good question to round out this Tutorial Tuesday, especially when we're working with limited budgets and we want to do DIY stuff. So when we're trying to expose for a subject at sunset, the front of them is very dark. There's a couple options that come to mind when you don't want to use a flash. Number one, take one of those sunscreen protector things that you have in your car. They're very reflective. Use that to bounce light back into the front of your subject. And then here's another option. Go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get yourself one of those sheets of insulation. It has a reflective side right here and then a white side over there. It's a dual purpose and you can cut it down. And then finally, on the technical and editing side, you want to make sure you're shooting raw so that you have the maximum flexibility to work on your image. And then overexpose it just a little bit to get detail in the shadows.